The clang of a metal tray rang out sharply in the gleaming cafeteria. Soup, rice, and vegetables splattered across the white tiles like a patchwork of wounds. Malik Harris froze, eyes wide. His wheelchair had just been jostled askew, the wheels spinning and skidding, and now the lunch tray, the one thing he'd been trying to keep balanced, lay strewn amid a roar of laughter from the crowd. A blond boy in a crisp uniform hoisted high the cane Malik used to support himself whenever he had to stand. He waggled it like a gleaming trophy. "Careful there, cripple," he sneered. Laughter burst forth in chorus. Phones were whipped out en masse, red recording dots flickering like the eyes of hungry beasts in the dark. A cup of juice was flung straight onto Malik's shirt, blooming into a viscous purple blot on the white fabric. "Billionaire's son, and he can't even stand up," a voice jeered, cold and merciless. "Fight, fight!" The chant started in a corner of the room, then spread into a pounding, ruthless rhythm. Some students broke into laughter. Others fell silent, heads lowered, letting the scene play out like a theater piece in which they were unwilling spectators. At a far table, Aisha Moore gently set down her chopsticks. The motion was unhurried. Her gaze was bright but serene. She watched, silent, each breath in step with the clamor ricocheting through the room. Her friends hadn't yet realized she'd stood. Not yet. But once Aisha stepped forward, nothing in that dazzling room would ever be the same. This was not merely an embarrassing scene in a cafeteria. This was where justice would find its voice even if it began in silence. What you just saw might leave you speechless, a boy in a shirt stained with juice, his cane ripped from his hand, surrounded by gales of laughter and the red glow of phone cameras. But pause a beat, because this story does not end in humiliation. It's the beginning of a lesson that we and the young people sitting in classrooms right now need to hear. This is Black Stories, where we tell moments that seem small but reveal the full wound of prejudice, and more importantly, how justice always finds a way to speak. If you believe schools should protect courage rather than indulge cruelty, stay with us. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room delivers the loudest lesson. And if you've ever witnessed or lived through moments of being looked down on because of your skin color, your circumstances, a condition you didn't choose, you'll understand why we share this story. It isn't just Malik's or Aisha's. It belongs to millions of children forced into silence every day. Hit like on this video if you believe in courage. Subscribe so you don't miss the stories we bring each week, journeys where the powerless are seen. Dignity is restored and justice, however late, still speaks. Don't just watch. Let your voice become part of this community. Because when you share these stories, you're not just pressing a button. You're sending a message. Courage matters, and silence will not win. Malik Harris knew humiliation like a shadow that refused to leave. At just 11, he had faced a loss many adults never confront in a lifetime. His mother, Lyora, the gentle woman who lulled him to sleep with the warm hum of Black spirituals, passed away on a quiet night, taking with her the bedtime tales that soothed her son's disabled legs. Her last words echoed endlessly in his mind. "The stars up there don't measure how fast you run. They still shine for you." But at Halloway Prep, the lavish private school his father chose, Malik felt none of those stars shining on him. With every uneven step on his cane, he could hear sneakers drumming mockery behind him, nicknames pierced like arrows, crippled Prince Billionaire baby daddies carry. The last one stung most because Mr. Harris, his father, was indeed unimaginably wealthy, yet could not buy the one thing his son craved, a normal life. Victor Harris, a powerful real estate mogul, had tried to be a father, but he was used to speaking in hurried contracts, not lullabies. After his wife died, the love he felt for his son was obscured by constant flights and handshakes that mattered more than bedtime. He never meant to neglect the boy, but the void he left hurt as much as the shoves Malik endured in the hallways. So Malik withdrew. He ate alone. He kept his eyes on the ground, and whenever humiliation closed in, he clung to his mother's last words like an invisible shield. A thin shield, but sometimes enough to keep him upright in the storm of cruel laughter. Across town in a neighborhood of peeling paint and tired storefronts, Aisha Moore carried a different burden. Her father, Sensei Idris Moore, had been the community's pride, a respected black martial artist who turned a cramped dojo into a refuge for kids standing at the threshold of gangs and street temptations. He often said, "Strength isn't for proving, it's for protecting." Aisha was only 10 when fate struck. One noon, her father's warm laughter still filled the dojo. A moment later, silence swallowed it in the grip of a heart attack. The spot where he had stood firm at the front of the scarred wooden floor became an empty patch where dust motes fell in the light. Aisha's mother, a night shift nurse at a public hospital, bent her aching back to raise her child through shift after shift. Bills stacked up on the kitchen counter like an invisible army, while Aisha's clothes came from the thrift store and her shoes wore out faster than they could be replaced. She didn't inherit money from her father, she inherited something far more precious, a code for living. Never throw the first punch, never fight for ego, only raise your hand to protect the weak. He repeated it until it became the rhythm of her heart. After he died, Aisha trained alone in the cracked dojo. Every stance, every form was a quiet conversation with the father she'd lost. At Halloway Prep, she looked like just another charity girl, a scholarship kid. Whispers trailed behind her. "She doesn't belong here. Look at those shoes." Charity. But behind her calm eyes lay steel forged in discipline. Where Malik curled inward, Aisha observed. Where he endured, she prepared. 2 children from opposite worlds, their fates were being set on the same scale, at a school where prejudice wore silk and cruelty became entertainment. Halloway Prep was more than a school. It was a palace gilded in the guise of education. Corridors were lined with gleaming red carpet mirrors reflecting every designer shoe. Vast panes of glass bounced student silhouettes back at them, a reminder that image here mattered as much as learning. Each morning, Teslas and Bentleys queued at the gate doors, sliding open with the hush of a royal ceremony. Drivers in suits, parents in elegant coats, leather backpacks embossed with student names cradled like treasures. Beneath neon lights, Rolexes, Cartier bracelets, and Balenciagas flashed like fine metal. In this environment, wealth wasn't just currency, it was shield and armor. Whoever wore it walked hallways unchallenged and sat at tables none dared invade. Even throwaway jokes could become orders when spoken by those at the top. For Malik, each halting step became an ink blot on that lavish canvas. The tap of his cane on marble was a drum offbeat in a perfect orchestra, drawing sideways glances and stifled smiles. No one said it aloud, but their eyes were heavy enough to remind him, "You're not like us." And Aisha. She moved quietly through that sea of labels, with a frayed backpack whose zipper had long since snagged. Discount store shoes, jeans with a slightly frayed hem, lunch in a Tupperware. The smell of beans and reheated rice felt out of place amid fresh pizza and sushi. Someone snickered. "Smell that poverty." Phones clicked to record, but no one filmed her calm face and eyes as silent as steel. In a world where money determined your seat and your laugh, Malik, though wealthy, didn't know how to wear the armor of power, and Aisha had never been offered it. They were 2 unprotected silhouettes in a kingdom where prejudice was the unwritten law. Every elite school has a king without a formal throne. At Halloway Prep, that name was Brandon Clark. Waves of brown hair arranged like an ad spread sneakers that cost a working family a month's wages, and the Clark surname etched on the gymnasium honor board, everything made Brandon the son of an orbit none dared defy. Two shadows always flanked him. Mason tall fond of flexing his fists as a silent threat, and Tyler phone always primed waiting to turn cruelty into content. When the trio entered the cafeteria, space seemed to shift to make way. Brandon's laughter rang out and trailed a chorus of forced chuckles. At Halloway, that laugh was a signal bow or be crushed. Students crowded their table like satellites seeking light. A seat nearby meant basking in a shard of their glow. To land in their sights meant becoming sport. In a place where every moment could be a clip, cruelty wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. Malik often walked as if invisible until the day Brandon decided to see him. Aisha, with her worn shoes, needed only to cross Tyler's lens to become content for a vicious story. At Halloway, no one asked, "Should we stop this?" They asked, "Will this go viral?" And then, as if by fate, the wearers of invisible crowns turned their gaze on Malik. The cane, the limp, the downcast eyes, everything lit up like a signboard for predators. The crowd waited, holding its breath, not to intervene, but to be entertained. The cafeteria, once a place to eat, had become an arena where a reputation could be crushed by the lightest shove. It was a Friday noon, the vast room of Halloway's cafeteria ringing with the clatter of trays and weekend laughter like a final chorus. Malik sat at a modest corner table trying to steady his tray on his knees, eyes fixed on a plate of cold fried chicken. Brandon's shadow stretched across the tabletop. His smirk curled. His eyes gleamed as if he'd found a new toy. Mason cracked his knuckles. Tyler already had his phone-up lens aimed squarely at Malik. "Let's see how the crippled prince eats lunch," Brandon drawled. Before Malik could react, Brandon's hand flicked. The tray sailed up, spun once midair, then crashed onto the tiles with a harsh report. Rice, chicken, vegetables. Everything sprayed like a satirical painting. Grape juice from Mason's hand poured straight onto Malik's shirt, a purple stain soaking in like an indelible mark. Laughter exploded. A voice hissed, "Billionaire's kid can't even stand!" The chant blurred up from the back. "Fight, fight, fight!" A few voices at first spreading into a ruthless cadence. Phones rose red dots blinking like 100 eyes hungry for blood. Shaking, Malik reached for his cane. Tyler was faster, snatching it up and raising it like a trophy. "Who wants it?" he shouted, and the mob howled. Malik's shoulders recoiled. His breath came short and quick, heart banging against his ribs. He wanted to disappear into the cold tile. But there was nowhere to hide. The entire room had become an arena, and every eye was on him. Just then, from a table tucked in the shadows, Aisha Moore set down her chopsticks. The motion was so quiet no one noticed, but her gaze had locked onto the scene. A moment later, she stood. The cafeteria didn't know it yet, the real battle had just begun. The cafeteria's noise softened over a few heartbeats, as if the crowd surprised itself with its own fervor. In that pocket of quiet, Aisha left her table. Not hurried, not flashy, each step like entering the storm's eye, slow calm, weighted with intent. Brandon clocked her, and his smirk stretched wider. "Well, the scholarship girl. Here to play bodyguard?" he jeered, triggering another round of laughter. Tyler brandished Malik's cane, taunting, "You gonna limp along with him too?" Aisha didn't answer. She stooped to pick up the fallen tray and set it neatly on the table. With her other hand, she righted the chair that had been knocked aside. The motions were simple, saturated with composure. Malik looked up, his shaking eyes meeting hers, steady, unshakable, as if saying without words, "You're not alone." Brandon chuckled darkly, stepping close enough that his breath brushed her face. "Pathetic. Let's see if you've got any guts." He shoved Malik again. Malik lurched, almost fell, but Aisha's hand landed on his shoulder, holding him upright. The air tightened. Phones lifted higher, lenses zoomed in. "Fight, fight!" The chant boiled. Brandon raised his fist knuckles, blanching. Malik stammered, "Aisha," voice about to break. The decision arrived in a single breath. Brandon lunged. His fist met only air. Aisha slipped back a step, turned her hips, set a hand on his arm, and borrowed his own momentum. Brandon pitched forward, crashing into the table behind him. Dishes clattered across the room. A wave of shock rolled through the crowd. The cheers changed rhythm from mockery to astonishment. Someone whispered, "She," didn't hit him. In that held silence, Aisha stood straight, breathing, even eyes serene. She had not flared in anger. She hadn't thrown a single punch. Only absolute control, something bullies never understand. The cafeteria's din blurred in Aisha's mind. In its place surged a memory so vivid she could smell the old wood and sweat of her father's tiny dojo. A summer afternoon, sunlight slipped through the window slats, laying stripes of gold across the cracked floorboards. Aisha was 10 small fists clenched, tears bright on her cheeks. "Dad, why can't I hit back?" she burst out, voice breaking. "They push me at school. They laugh at me every day. Why can't I prove I'm strong?" Aisha Moore knelt to meet her eyes, threadbare calloused hand resting lightly on his daughter's fists. He loosened each of her fingers until her small palms open, no longer curled in. "Sweetheart, strength isn't about how much hurt you can cause," he said slowly, warmly. "Strength is knowing you don't have to." Aisha choked. "But what if they don't stop?" Idris smiled fleetingly, sad, fiercely proud. "Then you stand, you move, you protect. But you never start. You don't fight to feed your ego. You fight for one reason only." He lifted her chin gaze steady and sure. "To protect the weak." That memory burned through Aisha's veins. Back in Halloway's cafeteria, Brandon staggered up, face flushed with shame. Mason began to growl, ready to charge. Aisha tightened 2 fingers and drew breath, not to attack, but to do exactly as her father taught: stand firm, move, protect. The crash of dishes hadn't yet faded when high heels hammered the tiles like a judge's gavel. Vice Principal Ms. Kensington appeared, rigid posture, eyes sweeping the crowd. Her gaze did not stop on Brandon wobbling or Mason groaning on the floor. It fixed on Aisha, still upright, breathing steady. "You as well?" She pointed, voice like a verdict. "Violence is never acceptable. You are suspended immediately." A murmur rippled. Phones swung to capture the moment. Brandon, milk still on his lip, managed a faint smirk, thinking he'd gotten away with it. But from the crowd, a trembling voice rose. "Excuse me, Ms. Kensington. You haven't seen everything." All eyes turned to a student named Naomi. Her phone still lit in her hand. Face, pale eyes blazing with resolve, she strode to the smartboard. With one tap, the video appeared crisp and indisputable. The room fell silent save for the playback: Brandon flipping the tray, Mason dousing juice, Tyler snatching the cane. The chant pounding, "Fight, fight." Then the clear frames, Aisha only evading, turning, redirecting, no punches. Brandon crashing from his own momentum. Mason toppling by his own force. The clamor died. Aisha's gentle words sounded in the clip. "We didn't throw the first punch. We only stood when we had to." When the screen went dark, the room erupted in cheers and applause. Some students even cried. They knew too well the feeling of being cornered. Ms. Kensington stood frozen, face flushed. Her authority wavered under the weight of undeniable truth. In that instant, justice found its voice not from an adult's gavel, but from a student's video. Less than an hour after the cafeteria calmed, Naomi's video appeared on Instagram. The caption was simple. "The scholarship girl just dropped the bullies. This wasn't a fight. This was discipline." Within minutes, hundreds of shares, flame, and fist emojis and hashtags flooded in. #StandTall. #discipline. Over ego. /justice. Halloway. On TikTok, the clip spawned countless edits, Brandon's missed punch in slow-motion music swelling Aisha's gentle pivot, sending him into the table. Comments poured in. "She's a weapon. Notice she never swung first. That's real martial arts." By midnight, Twitter was awash with quotes. "Stand up not to prove, but to protect." Aisha Moore's name trended alongside hashtags buoyed by posts from strangers, proud parents of kids who'd been bullied, students everywhere writing that they'd found a new symbol. It wasn't just social media. Local news jumped in. The 6 p.m. broadcast ran the clip beside an old photo. Someone unearthed a young Aisha in a jia bowing beside her father, Sensei Idris Moore. The anchor intoned, "Today, a scholarship student defended a classmate against bullies using discipline, not violence. And Detroit remembers her late father who taught dozens of teens that true strength comes from self-control." The whole city began to talk. But the deepest aftershock wasn't out there. It was kindling quietly in a glass-walled penthouse high above, where Victor Harris' billionaire father sat alone staring down at the city lights. For the first time, his fingers stopped skimming emails. On his phone, the clip kept playing not as a school incident, but as a wake-up call aimed straight at his heart. In the lavish penthouse on the 48th floor, Victor Harris sat at a walnut desk surrounded by screens brimming with emails, reports, contracts. But this time, his eyes weren't on the numbers. On his phone, the Halloway Prep clip looped again and again. He saw his son's shoulders hunched, limp, gate eyes downcast. The sight caught in his throat because it was the same posture he'd been seeing for months while telling himself he'll get over it. He'd been wrong. Then the frame shifted. The scholarship girl Aisha stepped in. No blows, no shouting. A soft turn and Brandon fell by his own weight. She placed the cane back in Malik's hand and bowed her head to whisper, "Stand up straight." The words cut through his memory like a blade. He recalled Leora, his late wife, telling Malik before her final breath, "The stars don't measure how fast you walk. They still shine for you." His eyes filled and he refused to blink them away. He hit replay this time with the sound off. All that remained was posture, a small boy lifting his head for the first time, a quiet girl making a room listen. In that moment, Victor realized for years he had tried to father with money when what his son needed was presence. He picked up his phone to text Malik. His fingers shook, then erased, then typed again. At last, a simple line, "I'm proud of you. I'm on my way. Send." Then to his assistant, "Cancel the 3 p.m. I need to go to the school." His voice was no longer a dry command, but resolve. For the first time in years, he would not lead with power. He would lead with being there. The next morning, Halloway's cafeteria was no dining hall. Tables pushed aside, students packed in like spectators awaiting a hearing. On the platform, Principal Wallace adjusted his tie, voice faintly trembling, aware of dozens of phones lifted to record every word. Yesterday's incident, he began, drew considerable attention. "The video has circulated widely, and the truth is indisputable. Aisha Moore and Malik Harris acted in self-defense." The room burst into applause, echoing off polished walls. 2 former rulers of the cafeteria shuffled in with heads down Brandon Clark and Mason Hill. Their swagger was gone. Parents trailed behind them, suits and pearls, unable to hide the shame. Phones zoomed, capturing the princes turned defendants. The families have insisted both boys take responsibility. The principal continued stern. He turned gaze cold. Brandon. Mason. Speak. Brandon's swallowed voice rough and shaking. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mocked him. Shouldn't have pushed him. Malik didn't deserve that. Mason's fist tightened, then dropped. I disgraced myself and my family. I was wrong. Silence settled. The apologies sounded so small they nearly disappeared. Aisha stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carved through the hush. Don't just apologize to us. Apologize to everyone you made into a joke. Malik wasn't your first target, just your last. A heavy beat. Brandon's lips quivered. Then he turned to the entire student body. I'm sorry. To everyone. Mason nodded, repeating the words. Cheers thundered. Shoes stomped in rhythm on the floor. The balance of power had shifted. No more Brandon. No more Mason. For the first time, Halloway was guided by truth and by a scholarship girl who knew how to stand tall. That afternoon, sunlight poured into the penthouse living room through floor-to-ceiling glass. For the first time in years, Victor Harris wasn't in front of his wall of emails, nor holding his familiar Mont Blanc to sign a deal. He sat on the sofa beside his son. Malik, still in the white shirt streaked with yesterday's purple stain, chuckled softly as he replayed the clip on his phone. Victor didn't laugh right away. His voice caught. You know your mother always said someone would help you stand tall. Today, I think I met her. Malik looked up, eyes bright with a trace of hesitation. No, Dad. Aisha didn't just help me stand tall. She helped you too. The words struck home. Victor reached over and hugged his son, the embrace Malik had waited for so long. No promises, no plans. Just presence. Just father and son. Outside, the community buzzed with hashtags and comments. Inside this room, everything fell quiet. Only a heartbeat, and Malik's small laugh as he felt for the first time that he wasn't a crippled prince, but a boy truly loved. Victor gazed at the skyline, a scatter of towers lit like constellations. For years, he'd believed wealth could plaster over every crack. Now he understood 2 things money cannot buy are courage and connection. He had just found both right beside him. From that day, Malik wasn't the only one who changed. Victor learned to set aside the role of real estate billionaire to become what his son needed most, a father who listens, shows up, and stands tall with him. The story at Halloway Prep wasn't just another cafeteria bullying incident. It mirrored a truth many young people live every day, being mocked and dismissed simply for being different. Malik was ridiculed for his limp. Aisha was scorned for her poverty. Brandon and Mason believed power and wealth entitled them to decide who deserved respect. And then with composure alone, Aisha proved strength isn't in the roar, but in choosing not to strike first. She didn't need to throw a single punch. She needed only to honor her father's legacy. Protect the weak. Never fight for ego. Because of that, the whole room listened. The whole community reconsidered. It wasn't a schoolyard brawl. It was a lesson true. Courage isn't swagger. It's standing when it matters. For Malik, that day wasn't just the first time he stood tall with his cane in hand. It was the first time he found his voice again. For Victor, it was the day he learned that fatherhood isn't fed by contracts or assets, but by presence. And for all of us, the story is a reminder. silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes disciplined silence is exactly what ends brutality. If this story moved you, hit like to send a message that courage outweighs cruelty. Share, so every child who feels invisible knows they are not alone. And don't forget to subscribe to join us each week, where Black stories are told, justice finds its voice, and silence turns into strength. Because bullies only win when courage goes quiet, and courage only wins when we speak up together.